Truth AFR Talk, and we've got a jam-packed show for you. The story of the day and the week continues to be Syria, and whether we are going to take military action or not, it looks like we're going to. We'll talk to Lieutenant Colonel Gordon Kakulu next hour on that. But first, we'll do a little recap of what happened this week. Earlier this week, Thursday, Ed Henry and Josh Earnest, Deputy Press Secretary, had a discussion about the evidence that was being used to justify the potential attacks that would be coming from the United States and our allies. We'll get to that, too, in a minute. Ed Henry went on to ask about the connection to Iraq in the sense of, is this like Iraq? How is this not like Iraq with the evidence being questioned? And Josh Earnest had this to say, among other things. Roll it.
Now, as it relates to the situation in Iraq, I don't agree that these are similar situations. I think that there are some very important differences. What we saw in that circumstance was an administration that was searching high and low to produce evidence to justify a military invasion, an open-ended military invasion of another country, with the final goal being regime change. That was the articulated policy of the previous administration. The second thing is the president's been very clear that he is not contemplating an open-ended military action. He is contemplating what we're talking about here is something that's very discreet and limited. Thirdly, the president was also candid yesterday in his interview about the fact that we're not talking about regime change here, that we are talking about enforcing a critically important international norm. So I thoroughly reject the suggestion that these two situations are somehow similar.
What we are seeing right now in the Obama administration is they ran against the narrative, or excuse me, they embraced the narrative that the war wasn't really a war. It's a police action of some sort, and we can go back to the way it was before 9/11. There's no real war on terror. We got sidetracked in Iraq. 17 UN resolutions. I won't get down that road, but I will say that the Iraq war was justified, absolutely, especially in the climate that we were facing post 9/11. You say, Crane Durham, I disagree with you. Okay, that's fine, but nobody lied. Nobody knowingly misled, and that's exactly what the left did in this country. They said the very same things President Bush said in Iraq, about Iraq, and then on the altar of politics, they sacrificed national security and our reputation. And we've been apologizing for winning Iraq. Now we've given it back, and it's become a client state of Iran. And we did that because Vice President Biden couldn't establish the status of forces agreement. So now we are here in Syria and dealing with that. We don't have the assets in Iraq, obviously, and that would help neighboring. Bottom line, what do? Well, John Kerry made a case today of what to do, and he brought up the evidence specifically of the use of chemical weapons and says the death toll from these weapons that were used by the regime, the Assad regime, is 1,000 plus. Roll it.
We know where the rockets were launched from and at what time. We know where they landed and when. We know rockets came only from regime-controlled areas and went only to opposition-controlled or contested neighborhoods. And we know, as does the world, that just 90 minutes later, all hell broke loose in the social media. With our own eyes, we have seen the thousands of reports from 11 separate sites in the Damascus suburbs. All of them show and report victims with breathing difficulties, people twitching with spasms, coughing, rapid heartbeats, foaming at the mouth, unconsciousness, and death. We saw rows of dead lined up in burial shrouds, the white linen unstained by a single drop of blood. Instead of being tucked safely in their beds at home, we saw rows of children lying side by side, sprawled on a hospital floor, all of them dead from Assad's gas and surrounded by parents
and grandparents, yes. Absolutely. So Senator Kerry there making the case, ostensibly, to have a military response for this, made it clear that we are willing to act alone because, obviously, in Parliament across the pond, it was denied. They rejected it, use of military force. So what does this mean? Where does this go? Well, one thing is it was a very passionate, empathetic speech, but it was short on substance. And Ralph Peters was having nothing of it. Here is Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters responding to the case that Secretary of State John Kerry made for military action today. Roll it.
Melodrama is not a substitute for a strategy. There are two key points here. One, for all the cue the violin's sorrow, he did not explain why there is a real and present danger to the United States that merits the use of our military forces. He does not seem to grasp that the Assad regime is not targeting America with its chemical weapons, but if the Assad regime falls, and I have no sympathy for that regime, if the Assad regime falls and al-Qaeda and other Islamists get their hands on those chemical weapons, then we face a danger. The other point I'd like to make is that the hypocrisy in Kerry's remarks was absolutely stunning and revolting. When he called Assad a thug and a murderer who killed thousands of his own people with poison gas, he described Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein killed over 1 million people. Where was Kerry? Where was Obama then? Is there a difference? Was Saddam Hussein a good dictator who used good poison gas? Yeah. That was all melodrama, appealing to the emotions. We need hard-headed, rational analysis and strategy.
Well, let's go back just for a moment. And by the way, I've got to mention the fact that Colonel Peters is a good friend of the show, and I had the privilege of meeting Bud Day, may he rest in peace, and Colonel Kukulu and Colonel Peters. I knew Colonel Kukulu, and I actually knew Ralph too. Bottom line, sat there and was just asking them both questions about 5 years ago. It was an amazing experience because of how the breadth of their knowledge. And I guess that's what it gets to, right? We're seeing an inexperienced administration, at least a willfully inexperienced administration. They've had experience with this, but they've chosen to lead from behind. They haven't identified what we believe in. They've denied support for people that we actually do and could work with the Free Syrian Army. But now the Free Syrian Army has been infiltrated by al-Qaeda-linked terrorists and actual al-Qaeda terrorists. So bottom line, what do? 2011, we had Syria, in essence, surrounded. But we didn't take advantage of that. We denied the Syrian rebels at that time or the protesters, we denied them resources. So what does that mean? It means it's a lost opportunity and we're paying for it now. That's not to play politics with this. I don't think it is playing politics. I don't think anybody cares less about the children because they're not for taking out the Assad regime or military action. I think what we're looking for is a comprehensive plan. A little later on in the show, I'll give you mine. I'll see what the colonel has to say about his plan. That all said, on the flip side, Seton Motley and how race is now going to be injected into the economic debate. Now, Crane, it's been there. Okay, I'll explain. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, probably on, hey, say it with me now, AFR Talk.